Hey, welcome back, everybody. It's 1 o'clock and time to get started again. So, we're talking about liens. But first, I want to make sure that everybody got their questions answered by Lauren, and everything seems to be okay, not seeing any residual questions. So, let me moderate the conversation and we will move on. So, we covered about liens, general and specific liens. We talked about voluntary and involuntary liens. What does the effect of a lien have on the title rights of ownership? Well, the liens run with the land. What does that mean? You bought a house with a mortgage. The mortgage is tied to the house. So when you sell the house, the proceeds from the sale have to pay off the mortgage lien. It's just the way it works. So the lien is an encumbrance that runs with the land. Liens attached to the property, not to the property owner. Taxes on your house have to be paid and they're attached to your house, not you personally. However, a mortgage lien is attached to you personally. It's the only one that is. So, remember, you have to sign what's called a promissory note. We're going to talk about mortgages on Monday and Tuesday. You're going to discover all those things about mortgages. But a borrower in New Jersey has to sign a promissory note making the debt personal to the person borrowing, but is it attached to the property? Liens are recorded in the public record to establish what is known as priority of lien status. In other words, whoever records the debt first is first in line to get paid when you sell your house. Whoever records second is second in line to get paid when you sell your house, etc., etc. So priority of liens is established by which debt is recorded first against the property. And whoever records second gets paid off second, etc., etc. Mortgage liens, construction liens, judgments are court orders attaching debt against your property. And there are other liens. There's mechanic liens. You hire a mechanic to do a job, you don't pay him. He can put a lien against your property. So there's all types of financial claims or liens that can be enforced against a property. If someone doesn't pay their liens and are delinquent in their payments, then that lien holder can record what's known as a lis pendens notice. A lis pendens notice is a notice in the public tax records that make known that a future legal action is about to take place against this property. Most likely, mortgage companies or municipalities record lis pendens in the records because they're about to take a mortgage foreclosure or a tax foreclosure action against that property owner. So lis pendens are something to look out for. All right. Now, we talked about liens, a financial claim against property. Now, an easement is a physical usage claim against property. An easement is a right given to one party to use someone else's property. It's an easement. So my neighbor says to me, Tim, I got this other property behind yours. And, if I had to, I have to go a mile down the road, take another mile left and another mile back to get there. Could I just walk across the back of your property to get to mine? And if I say yes, I may want to grant that neighbor an easement, a right to cut across my property to get to their other property. I don't have to, but boy, wouldn't I be a nice neighbor by doing that? I don't have to charge him. I could charge him. It could mean a few dollars to me. But he's my neighbor. I should be nice to my neighbor. But just remember, any easement granted to your neighbor, if he sells his property, guess what? That easement goes with the land to the new owner. So they get the easement previously enjoyed by that owner. So that means it goes with the land when the sale of the property occurs. So an easement, once again, is a right acquired by one party to use the land of another party for a special purpose. He's cutting across the corner of my lot to get to his other property. Specific purpose, a right given to him. And we'll talk about how to create these easements and how to terminate them a little later in the lesson. But right now, I'm just talking about easements in general. There are different types of easements or rights in your property that you can be given to other people. The first one is known as an easement appurtenant. Now you have a diagram in your book. Now I'm going to use a white page here, a whiteboard, and try to illustrate what they're talking about. So apparently here's the road, and here's a driveway into this house. All right, it's got a chimney, smokestack. Good. And he's got a property border that runs roughly here, and his neighbor's house is back here. And he's got a chimney that sticks up and has smoke coming out of it too. Well, he has a driveway that goes kind of like this, right? This is the property border. And there's another driveway that goes like this, that goes to a lake in the background here. All right? It's got little waves in it. Those are not seagulls, those are waves. You can tell I'm a very bad drawer. But who cares? I'm getting the point across. So the fact is now, what are we looking at here? Well, we got this guy with a driveway on his own land, goes to his house, no problem. But he's got this other driveway that goes to this lake in the back of this other guy's property. Well, in order to have that, this neighbor must have granted him that right at some point in the past. So now this guy has an easement on this guy's property. This goes with the land when sold and is called an easement appurtenant. Goes with the land. This easement may be a different type of easement altogether. Now, the reason I say that is because if this guy didn't have this driveway, how's he going to get in and out of his house? He'd have to put a driveway in. And if the terrain out here was so treed up and so hilly and everything else that you can't get through over there, he's going to have to get around that. So he asked his neighbor if he could have an easement by necessity. I can't get out of my yard to the road. There's no way. Can I cut across your yard? And if the neighbor says yes, then he has created an easement by necessity to a lot that normally he could not get to because it's what's known as landlocked, no access to the street. So we've got an easement appurtenant and an easement by necessity in this diagram. So how do I know what's going on here? Well, first of all, let's think about terms. This guy who has a right to use this guy's land is called the dominant estate. This guy is the servient estate because his land serves the other ones with a right across his land. So the dominant estate owner has the right to use this guy's land, but this guy does not have a right to use this guy's land. Therefore, he's the servient estate and he's the dominant estate. Now, before we go any further, does anybody have any questions about what I'm trying to convey? Does granting someone access to your property have to be documented? Yeah, you should. So David, please be more specific. What is it that you don't understand? Or Ayana, please specify, what do you not understand? The giving the rights. I'm not sure what you're saying. You lost me when you started with dominant. Well, I'm assuming you guys read this stuff, so you probably had a basic understanding of what dominant state owner was. I'm assuming that. Did I assume wrong? Yes, I did. Okay, apparently I said that. Does granting them easement appurtenant over time mean they own the land? No, 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 no. You're not giving them the ownership rights of property. You're just giving them the right to use the property. If I purchase lot A, can I? Okay, wow, we're getting way off track already. Let's stop for a second. Guys, again, I have to assume that you pre-read this text and had a basic understanding of this information before I brought it up. I'm assuming, I believe incorrectly, that there's a good number of people that never read this stuff and now are being presented with this information for the first time, which can be confusing. So this is why I stress to everyone, please pre-read these chapters before you come to school. Because if you don't, it's just a source of confusion and we wind up running off track and delaying, and we run long during the day because of that. So please, I'm going to beg of you one more time, please pre-read this information before you come to class. If you don't have a book, then that's your problem. I can't see how you would want to take this course without a book, or even start a class without a book. Therefore, guys, you got to have the book and you got to read it. If you don't read your book, you're not going to pass the test. It's that simple. So again, guys, please, let's be courteous and do the right thing. Pre-read your chapters, understand the concepts before you come, so we don't have to spend time explaining definitions, going things over and over again. But again, I'm now sounding like a school teacher, and I don't want to do that. So please, guys, help me do my job better by pre-reading this information. So I'm sorry, I'm going to have to cap the questions here. We've got a lot of ground to cover. Another chapter and a half to get through. So moving on, in the diagram also, they show telephone poles in the background on this guy's property. The telephone poles are across the dominant estate owner's property. Who put them there? Utility company. Did they ask permission? At some point in time, way back when they put them up, they must have. And the estate owner must have granted them the right to put the telephone poles there. This easement where the telephone poles are called a, boy, you just lost me for a second. That would be an easement in gross. Gross meaning many, many people are benefited by the presence of this telephone line going through the property, or this cable, whatever you want to call it, power line. So in this diagram, we have an easement appurtenant, there's the G up there, an easement by necessity, when there was no other way to get to the property, and an easement in gross. Moving on. Then there's something called an easement by prescription. Now, this is a very interesting concept where someone is using someone else's property without express permission or rejection. Let's give an example. When I moved into my property 27 years ago in Oakland, New Jersey, before my daughter was born, I'd get out every Saturday morning, fire up my dirt bike, and go up my neighbor Chuck's driveway up to the top of Skyline Drive, go on Cannonball Trail, and zip up into New York State and have a blast all day long. And then I come back in the afternoon, come down Chuck's driveway, and park my bike in my house. Did it every Saturday, continually, openly and notoriously, meaning everybody sees me do it. Everybody knows what I'm doing. Chuck even sees me doing it, waves as I go by. He never once rejected my ability to do that, nor did he ever say I have permission to use it. He just watches me do it. Because he neither rejected or accepted by stating so or writing me a letter saying it's okay or it's not okay, and because I'm doing it in an open and notorious manner for the exclusive purpose of getting up the mountain, If I continue doing that for a minimum of 20 years, I can establish an automatic easement by prescription without his consent. If I meet the state's requirement, open and notorious exclusive use, without permission, without rejection, for a minimum of 20 years, I could record an easement by prescription against his property records and establish for myself the right to use his driveway any and every Saturday that I wish. And he has no say in the matter whatsoever. I literally stole the right to use his driveway without his permission. So an easement by prescription is something that's taken from someone else over a long period of time. That person whose land I'm using neither rejects nor gives me permission to use it. Therefore, I'm just using it. And I do it without hiding. Everybody sees me, knows I'm doing it, hears me, sees me for the use of getting up and down the mountain. If I do it for the state required 20 years or more, I can record a quitclaim deed establishing my easement by prescription against Chuck's driveway, and he has no say in the matter whatsoever. So here's 4 different easements we just created. An easement appurtenant goes with the land. Easement in gross for the utility companies. Easement by necessity when there is no access to the lot. Or an easement by prescription. So those are the 4 easements you have to know to pass the test. Are there any further questions about these 4 easements? So easement appurtenance says that may grant the person access. What if they say no? Well, if they say no, then they say no, then you don't get the right to use. That's correct. If an easement by necessity is denied, can you attempt to take it to court to have it approved? Yes, you can, Rachel. And if the court agrees, they will incorporate the easement by necessity without the owner's permission. Does the easement by prescription get passed to the next owner or tied to the person who it's not tied to a person? If, let's say, my son, instead of me, he takes the dirt bike out every Saturday and continues in my use, well, he's just tacking his time onto mine and continues in the easement by prescription. He can do that. So if you crash your dirt bike on his driveway with the easement by prescription, is he liable for your journey? I don't know. Talk to an attorney. I would have no idea. I'm not an insurance or an attorney, so I can't answer your question. And by the way, that has nothing to do with knowing what an easement is. How would you get proof and easement by prescription? Open and notorious manner. Everybody sees me doing it. I'm not hiding it. I got a witness when every neighbor of mine sees me do it. And Chuck himself. Okay, let's see. What proof do you have to give to prove that you use that land? Again, eyewitness accounts from everybody seeing me doing it. For easement by prescription, do you prove the 20-year minimum without a written documentation? Again, eyewitness testimony from everybody seeing it would be adequate. It is not a form of adverse possession. It's like adverse possession, but it's not adverse possession. Okay, looks like we covered the question, so let's move on. The next thing is called a party wall. And what's that? A party wall is where 2 properties both share one common element. Maybe you've been to Jersey City or Hoboken or Manhattan or Brooklyn and you've seen brownstone houses, row houses, just side by side, no alleyways, just side by side and down the entire block. 2 of those properties share one common element called the party wall. It is a divider between this house and this house. This wall, according to new construction codes, must be fire rated, and it delineates the separation of 2 properties. A party wall agreement in a deed would specify that both parties, this owner and this owner, share equally in the upkeep and maintenance of this party wall forever. And if one party damages or destroys it, then that party is responsible to repair or replace it. So a party wall agreement is something that would be recorded in the deed of conveyance when transferring ownership rights to a property, so that people know that you and your next door neighbor share a common element that both are responsible for. In some towns, there are two houses that may enjoy a party driveway. In Ridgewood, over on Linwood Avenue, over by the hospital, there's a bunch of beautiful old colonials. And every once in a while, there's this driveway, and I'll try to use a whiteboard. So here's a house, and here's a house. And they're nice houses, right? Here's the street. And there's this driveway that goes up and then splits off to a garage back here. And this one splits off and goes to a garage back here. Up from this point down to the road, these two properties own a party wall agreement for the upkeep and maintenance of the common road that they both share. They're both equally responsible for the upkeep and maintenance of that road. If it deteriorates and needs repaving or patching, they're both responsible equally for the repair and replacement of that road. So a party wall agreement doesn't have to be just a wall. It could be a driveway. It could be a physical separating rock wall or something like that both parties are responsible for. And that actually is an easement, because remember, you own it and so does your neighbor. So they have rights in that as well. So we've just talked about easements, a physical use encumbrance against property. I'm sorry. Now, how do we create easements? Good question. So creating an easement can be very easy. Just take out a piece of paper and write your neighbor a note. Mr. Neighbor, I grant you the right to use the back 10 feet of the right-hand side of my property for a distance of about 15 feet for the use of transversing my property to get to another property that you own. And I could put a time limit on it, or I could make it forever. That way, a simple statement, a written document called an express grant, an oral or written document, can convey an easement given to my neighbor. And what we would both do is take that document and record it in the public records against our property records to prove that that neighbor has an easement against my property. Or I could do it in my deed of conveyance when I want to sell my property. It may be a conveyance in the deed that says this property has an easement granted to the neighbor, and it would specify on a map where that would be. That creates and maintains the easement either for a period of time or forever. Or an easement can be created by long time usage, such as the easement by prescription, 20 years or more. But again, certain requirements. Or by necessity. And sometimes, as we said, the court may be involved to create the easement by necessity. Or, which one is the hardest to prove, by implication. Well, I've been using that property for a long time. Well, specifically, when do you use it? Because I never see it, and I own the property. Oh, it's on times nobody knows, like 3 in the morning. Well, I'm not familiar with you using any of my property at all. In fact, there's no evidence that you ever have. Oh yeah, I've been there using it a long, long time. Therefore, I have an easement on your property. No, I'm sorry. You're going to have a lot more body of proof to justify your demanding an easement on my property. Where's your evidence? You guys, by implication means, well, you seem to have a right to use. Can you prove it? Well, not exactly. I'm implying that I have an easement. I don't really have one. I'm implying that I have one. Guys, it doesn't grant you an easement. So by implication, you must establish tangible evidence of use over a period of time. And if you can't, then there is no easement. If you can, there still may be no easement. Remember, if I have a no trespassing sign posted on my property, that says to everybody, you don't have the right to use my property and never will, and they could never create an easement against me because I posted no trespassing sign. So that's how an easement can be created. How do we terminate an easement? Ooh, that's a better question. Well, when the purpose for which the easement was created no longer exists. That easement by necessity from the neighbor. Remember, he couldn't get to the street because of the grove of trees. Well, what if a natural blight came along and wiped out that crop of trees? Then there would be no obstruction to get to the road, and the purpose for which he created the easement by necessity no longer exists. We could terminate the easement, and he can create a new road back to the street from his property. So the purpose for which the easement was created now is gone. It no longer exists. Easement done. Or when the dominant estate owner terminates the easement against a servient estate owner. Remember that driveway from the house to the lake? I'm sorry, yeah, from the house to the lake. The house using the easement was the dominant estate, the lake being on the serving estate owners. Hey, he's a serving estate. The dominant estate owner could tell the serving estate, I no longer want to use your lake, so you can cancel the easement. But the serving estate cannot cancel the easement against the dominant estate owner. I don't want you to use my property anymore. I'm canceling the easement. He can't do that. Only the dominant estate owner could cancel an easement appurtenant. Or when one property owner buys the other property out. The serving estate owner buys the dominant estate owner. Now he owns both lots. Since he owns both, he cannot have an easement against his own ownership rights. So therefore, the easement would be terminated. Or by release of the dominant estate to the serving estate, the pathway to the lake, or by abandonment. Abandonment, what does that mean? Well, it's got to be for how many years? 20 years or more? Well, it's got to be more than time frame. What if a guy goes on vacation or sabbatical for 2 years and comes back and says, hey, what happened to my easement? Oops, he didn't abandon it, he was just away. So if he doesn't use it and doesn't maintain it for a period of time, which is never specified, then an easement can be terminated. In other words, you're going to have to hire an attorney, argue your case in court, and if the land use judge agrees, he can terminate the easement. So that's how you can create or terminate an easement. All right, last couple of concepts before we wrap up this chapter. A license. You probably have a license to drive a car. First of all, your license is not a right. Your license is a privilege, and it's a conditional privilege. You can lose your privilege if you speed too much and get too many tickets and points. Wow, so you can lose your license because you violated conditions of using it. Yes. I have a driver's license that say I have to wear these things when I drive, because if I don't, I'm legally blind and I could kill people. So I have a conditional use of my driver's license, which says if I don't wear these, can't drive. It also expires on a certain date, and I have to renew it every 4 years. An easement may not have any termination date whatsoever, or it might, doesn't matter. Could be temporary, could be permanent. And a license can be withdrawn by whoever granted the license for whatever reason they can determine. But an easement cannot just be withdrawn for any reason. So an easement is a right to use, a license is permission to use, and can be withdrawn at any time. All right, and then another type of encumbrance is called an encroachment. Your neighbor built a brand new cabana bar out in his backyard, and man, is it cool. But the problem is, when he built it, he put the footings over 3 feet onto your yard and then built his shed on top of it. That's an encroachment. His property came across the property line and now invades or encroaches into your yard. He does not have a right to do that. So you got to go to your neighbor and say, hey, you got to move your building back 3 feet or 4 feet or whatever the required distance is, so you're not encroaching on my property any longer. Encroachments are typically found through physical inspection. So if you guys have owned property for a while, like 7 to 10 years or longer, when's the last time you went out and took your survey out of the files and walked your property to match up your survey with your border lines? Never? Remember that neighbor put that new fence up a few years ago? Did he put it on the right side of the border line of your property? If he did, great. If he didn't, you wouldn't have known because you're not inspecting your borders. And if he didn't, how long has it been there? 20 years or more? Could he establish a right to use your property without giving permission through an easement by prescription? He could. Therefore, it's imperative, and I do say this often, go out and walk your border line with your survey to make sure that what you bought is what you still have. Because things change, and they can change very quickly, guys. People put stuff there, they grow something, a new hedge, a new flower bed, a fence. So it's not right on the property line, no big deal. Or is it? Yeah, it could be a very big deal. So physical inspection of property will reveal any encroachments on the border lines, and if they're found, they must be taken care of as soon as possible. If your neighbor doesn't want to cure the problem, then you have to go to court to solve it, because the only remedy is the private courts. So understand, guys, it's your property. You're the only one charged with protecting your property. No one else is going to protect it for you. Only you will. And then the last type of encumbrance on a property is a private deed restriction. Deed restrictions are private land use controls placed on the property by the owners or developers of property. Take an example. There was a development in Wyckoff, New Jersey. I believe it was back in the 80s. There were about 20 or 30 homes where a developer built homes with sideways facing garages, meaning the garage faced the sideways to the side yard, not to the street. Every house he built had a sideways facing garage. And the developer put in the deeds of all properties he sold to consumers that the driveway shall always be sideways facing in perpetuity. I mean, you can't change it. Therefore, if you want to buy a house in that development, you have to understand that your deed restricts you to only sideways facing garage. You can't change that. So this restriction can be put on a property by the developer of property or by the current seller or owner of the property. However, if a restriction is on the property, the current owner is bound by that restriction, and possibly all future owners of that property may be bound by that restriction. So understand, the more deed restrictions on a property, the less marketable that property becomes. So we've covered now chapter 6 in total. We've discussed easements and all the other encumbrance that can occur on a property. So let's go right into the Q&A for chapter 6 review. Give me a second while I pull this up. And then we will start chapter 7. All right, here we go. Number 1. The most complete ownership recognized by law is what? The most complete ownership recognized by law is and from those who did respond, 81% of you are correct, answering B, fee simple estate, correct. Number 2, a man devises a parcel of land to the local university so long as it is used for an experimental farm. 2 years after the man's death, the university begins to build a cafeteria on the land. In this case, the man's heirs can And from those responding, 75% correctly answered A, automatically becomes the owner's. Yes. Number 3, which of the following best describes a life estate? And from those who did respond, about 70% got it correct. It is A, an estate conveyed to A for the life of Z, and on Z's death to B. B would be a remainder man in that case. Number 4, a woman inherited her cousin's house, but it is hers only as long as the dog is alive, well, and living in the house. When the dog dies, the house goes to her cousin's grandson. The cousin's grandson is a, excuse me, and about 79% of you correctly answered B for boy, remainder men. Yes. Number 5, a woman owns a house and wants to sell it. Her husband must also sign the sales contract if and about 55% got it correct. D, it is their family house. Since they're married, they both must sign the deed for transfer of ownership rights and both sign the sales contract. Number 6, encumbrances include all of the following except. Encumbrances include all the following except. And about 2 out of 3 of you, 66%, correctly answered D, estate. Encroachments, liens, and easements are all types of encumbrances where an estate is an interest in property. Number 7, deed restrictions are created by a Deed restrictions are created by A, and 78% of us got it correct. A seller. It's a private restriction. Deeds are private restrictions of property. Government has nothing to do with it. Number 8. In certain circumstances, the owner of a landlocked property can go to court and require a permanent right to go over a neighbor's land for access in the form of an All right, 93% of us are correct, answering D, easement by necessity. Yes, very good. Number 9, the buyer of our house, the buyer of our house. Let me check this document. Let me check this question. Number 9, the buyer of a house, automatically receives the same right. Oh boy, this typos. The buyer of a house automatically receives the same right the seller had to use a party wall. The buyer owns an and 68% of you answered correctly. D, an easement. Yes. Number 10. The right to run a power line across the back of someone's property is an example of an easement. And 70% of you are correct, answering A, in gross. Remember, utility lines are typically easements in gross. Number 11, the owner of a small country house gives a neighboring farmer permission to plant crops on the 2 acres around his house. The owner changes his mind and decides to put a lawn in. He may withdraw the permission because the farmer had only a And the answer, of which 55% of you got correct, was C, a license. Remember, a license is permission. It's not a right. Number 12, a license is an example of a or an I'm kind of chortling a little bit because 55% of you answered easement. And I think I just finished saying that a license is permission, not a right. An easement is a right. Therefore, a license is an example of an encumbrance, of which only 23% of you had correct. So don't mix up your terms, guys. I know you're still learning, but the terms are important. Words are very important in your test. Number 13, two adjacent buildings share a central wall. This wall is known as a 95% of respondents got it correct. It is a party wall. Woohoo, party. Yeah. Number 14, which of the following is considered a lien on real estate? Well, 95% of you got it correct. It is B, an unpaid mortgage loan. A lien is a financial claim against property. Remember. Number 15, a lis pendens is and 70% of you are correct answering D, a recorded notice of possible future legal action against the property. Correct. Number 16, which of the following liens usually would be given the highest priority? And from those responding, 56% are correct answering B, the current real estate tax. Yes, your property taxes have a superior lien status to even the bank loans. You have to pay your taxes, if unpaid, first before any money goes to pay off mortgages. So B is correct. Number 17, to acquire an easement by prescription in New Jersey, a person must use the land owned by another person. Excuse me. And 69% of us got it correct, answering A, openly and without owner permission. A is correct. Number 18, the neighbor mistakenly built a new garage 2 feet onto the neighboring lot. The mistake results in a or an 94% of you are correct, answering D, encroachment. Yes. Number 19. A license differs from an easement in that it excuse me. And 83% are correct, answering C, may be withdrawn. And finally, number 20. After a buyer had purchased his house and moved in, he discovered that his neighbor regularly used the owner's driveway to reach a garage located on the neighbor's property. The owner's attorney explained that the ownership of the neighbor's real estate includes an easement over the driveway, and this property is called. And again, from those who have responded, it looks like about 59% of you are correct, answering D, the servient tenement. Yes. All right, good job. Real good. So we now have another chapter to start. So hang in there while I pull it up. Ownership of real estate. But before I start, does anybody have any general questions or follow-up before we move on? Arson, yes, you can. You tack your time